Okay, we're moving on from policy specifically, and we're talking still about this balance between state power and federal power. And that's where this debate over federalism really is issued. It's over the interpretation of parts of the Constitution. And so we're going to look at several aspects looking at that here as we continue talking about federalism and how that plays out in our constitutional system. Okay, so first off, we have this thing called enumerated powers. Unit 1, card 34. So have your card ready. And go ahead and flip over. If you need to pause, do it. All right. Okay, what is an enumerated power? An enumerated power specifically is powers just specifically described in the Constitution. And they are given to the federal government. Specifically described in the Constitution that are given to the federal national government. So I mean, like, it's written, it's very clear. They have the power, the national government, the federal government has the power to declare war. That's written right there. It's very specific. They have the power to tax. Okay, that's specific. It's written right there. All right, so those are enumerated powers. Punish pirates. That's another thing, piracy. Um, Also, these are called expressed or delegated powers. So all means the same thing. I'm sorry to give you all kinds of vocabulary word just to make it more confusing, but the reality is that there are lots of vocabulary to describe the same thing. And in this case, we have enumerated, expressed, or delegated, all mean the same exact thing. And they're written and you can read it and it's obvious. Okay, cool. An example of this is in Article 1, Section 8. In Article 1, that's about the Congress. Okay, it's about the legislature. Section 8 of Article 1 and Clause 1, so the first part of Section 8, it says this: Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and the general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the U.S. And that is an enumerated power. That is an expressed or delegated power. It's very obvious. You can read it right there. Congress has the power to collect taxes, duties, imposts, excises, pay debts. Okay, there you go. All right, they have that power. It's obvious. All right, that's enumerated. Let's continue. All right. One of the parts of Congress, one of the parts of the Constitution that's still debated is the 10th Amendment, and it was put in to protect states and state power. It kind of something that it was done to put in to make the anti-federalists happy. Okay, Unit 1, card 35, and you don't have to write the whole amendment out here. Okay, don't do that. But I want to read it to you. The powers not delegated or not expressed, not enumerated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectfully or to the people. Notice that it says the word reserved. That's why we call them reserved powers, that they're powers that the states have, because it says reserved to the states. Okay. Notice it says powers not delegated, meaning enumerated, meaning expressed. Backside. All right. So at the top of the backside of the card, right, really big, protects state power. That's the thing you have to know about the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment protects state power. That was the concern anti-federalists had, is that the federal government would end up just owning all the states and the states would be very powerless. All right. So here's what it says. If a power is not enumerated to the federal government, meaning it's not specifically written that it's a power of the federal government, then it's reserved to the states or the people. That's what the 10th Amendment says. If a power is not enumerated to the federal government, then it's reserved to the states or the people. So if it's not expressed, delegated, enumerated, all the same thing, written directly, then it's reserved to the people or to the states. An example is schools. Now, we've already said, though, that the federal government has power. No Child Left Behind, Common Core. And they are using the power of granting money to the states and saying, states, if y'all want this money, you do this. And that's why this whole debate over the power of the federal government has changed, especially in the last 100 years, as the federal government has given more and more money to the states and then gotten the states to do the things it wants. But historically and constitutionally, if the federal government doesn't have it enumerated, then it's not supposed to be doing it. All right, that's according to the Constitution. All right, that's the 10th Amendment. Another amendment that's big into this whole debate over the over this idea of federalism is the 14th Amendment. Again, card 1.36, right? 14th Amendment. You don't have to write the words down below. I'm going to give you an overview of it here really quick. So 14th Amendment 1.36. This is section 1. There's actually several parts of the 14th Amendment, but this is the most important one. It says all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state within they reside. This is to make sure that African Americans who are freed people just after the Civil War are guaranteed to be citizens, and that's because the Dred Scott's case said they weren't citizens. And had no rights that anyone needed to actually, respect. Now they're saying in the 14th Amendment, no, states, guess what? You will respect the rights of black people who used to be slaves. You will do that. All right. So this is a very explicit 14th Amendment is protecting the rights of freed people. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, property, without due process of law. This should have stopped there ever being Jim Crow laws. And actually, during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant, the federal government worked very hard to protect the rights of freed people. It was only after Reconstruction was ended and the North left, the military left the South and all that, the laws that we know as Jim Crow laws really came about. And then the Democrats gained power either in the House, the Senate, the presidency, pretty much continually one of the other, or the Supreme Court for the next, 100 years or so, 90 years. And that made it almost impossible to protect the rights of black people in the South after that, unfortunately. All right. So this just shows the 14th Amendment was to protect. But here's the deal. It's restricting the rights of states. This is taking away power from the states. So the 14th Amendment has been really, really important for protecting the rights of, civil rights of African Americans. And the 14th Amendment was done specifically to restrict the South from violating the rights, even though it didn't get interpreted or enforced. It still was there to do that. All right, backside. So what does it do? One at the top, right, really big, restricts state power. 10th Amendment gave power. 14th Amendment, I'm not going to say it makes the 10th Amendment moot because that would be wrong, but it does take away power from the 10th Amendment. So first it said all former slaves are citizens and the South can't take that away. So no state can violate that. And no state can violate the things that I'm listing coming up. Okay, ready? So 1, restrict state power. All former slaves are citizens. 2, no state can violate, and then just put like little dashes here with these things, or ABC, sorry. A, life, liberty, property. They can't take away life, liberty, property without due process. That means like going to court and having charges against you. You can lose your life if you violate someone else's life, right? You can lose your liberty, meaning being sent to prison, if you violate other people's rights. You can lose your property, but it has to be done with due process. All right. And by the way, you can't violate due process. Can't violate due process. And everyone has equal protection under the laws. That's from the federal government telling states they have to do that. That's why Brown versus Board of Education will rely on the enforcement of the 14th Amendment to protect African Americans' rights to go to schools that were, to desegregate schools. They use the 14th Amendment here. All right. And then lastly, maybe the most important part of this is that Congress has the power to enforce it. And so you have things like the Civil Rights Act in 1964 that'll be passed. There were other Civil Rights Acts that were passed in 57, 1960. There were Civil Rights Acts that were attempted to be passed in the 1860s and 1870s. Some of them were. We had the Enforcement Act during Ulysses S. Grant, where it basically created a federal agency that will eventually become the FBI to go after the KKK and destroy them in the 1860s and 70s. And so Congress has the right to enforce this. And like I said, during Reconstruction, they did. Okay, so that's the 14th Amendment. So this is this debate between federalism is about interpreting the 14th Amendment. It's about interpreting the 10th Amendment. It's about these enumerated versus what we're going to talk about in the next lesson in implied powers. And this has changed the relationship between the state and the federal government. All right, study these. You need to know them well. There'll be practices on them to do. Thanks.